understanding how AI impacts consumer and whether there's something called consumer AI or it's just consumer and then there's AI underpinning it, I think is a moving target, and there's a lot happening right now. So if we did this episode 3 months ago, the answers might have been different from what they are today. So if I open with the very open question of what is interesting in consumer AI, where do you then go first?
Well, look, first, I think we should just say that, to your point, there's a lot of interesting stuff in consumer that's not necessarily AI related, or at least AI driven. We'll probably talk later on about some of the ways that consumer businesses are using AI to build more quickly and more efficiently. But I think what captivates the imagination on the consumer AI stuff is just the kind of macro why now that it presents to really rethink existing consumer experiences and in fact open up entirely new consumer markets. And I guess we always default back to, okay, what are the broken consumer experiences or the problems out there that can now be unlocked by leveraging the new technology? And so we think about, there's a few, right? So one would be anything where the user experience is super fragmented. So I'm sure you've had the experience of online shopping, for example, or planning a trip. You're across 20 different tabs in Chrome. You're trying to compare across different sources. Lots of wasted time, and the opportunity to deploy AI to front load some of that heavy lifting for you is super compelling. I think the second category would be where things are opaque, and almost the old business models were very much exploitative of search costs. So you think about differential pricing in different channels. For the consumer, you could either spend loads and loads of time optimizing that you're getting the absolute best price at the absolute best time. And again, I think some of those tricks and tactics that are working against the consumer are going to fall away in an environment where we hopefully have AI agents enabling much more always on shopping behavior for us. We also think a lot about areas where true personalization is meaningful and required. So for a long time, we've obviously had personalization as a theme, but often that's meant more sort of segmentation. So we're going to put you, Andreas, into a bucket of people that look a little bit like you. But I think what's different with AI is the ability to truly personalize down to the unit of one. I actually had this weekend this discussion with my wife, who's French, about me getting my French citizenship. We were using ChatGPT, right, to figure out specifically for our circumstance, how long we've been married, where we live, all of this sort of stuff. What's the best path for us? And that's just a fundamentally better user experience than trying to trawl through 10 different advice blogs and piece together what's the most interesting or relevant bit for me. I think similarly, we think a lot about areas where there's kind of lots of disciplines that are playing into an overall answer or an overall product that the consumer wants. And we spend a lot of time at True thinking about the opportunity in consumer health when it comes to AI. If you think about, something presenting itself as a symptom, you're not feeling well for whatever reason, there could be lots of different underlying causes for that, whether it's your nutrition, whether it's your lifestyle, whether it's your sleep, whether it's some kind of biological issue. And to date, the way that you've solved that is going to a GP who you're hoping has the ability to reach into those different pockets of expertise and synthesize something that's most relevant to you. It's something that, the software that can do that on your behalf and have expert level expertise on all of those different disciplines and then play a role in aggregating it up to you as the consumer is incredibly powerful. And I guess across the board, what the common thematic that we think is really unlocked is where you have markets that were historically quite constrained on the supply side by high cost human labor. So you think about things like medicine or law or tax advice, whatever it might be. If you're now creating an environment where through the use of software, you can effectively automate large swathes of that and bring the marginal cost to serve down, that also means you can bring the price point down to a much more compelling level to open up the long tail of markets that have historically been quite constrained in the preserve only of the wealthy. So we think the kind of opportunity to apply AI to fix some of these problems that are still inherent in everyday consumer lives it's extremely exciting time to be investing in companies that are doing that.
It's from an investment standpoint, so it's obviously exciting from a consumer standpoint for making the experience better, more personalized, more accessible. But just as an investor, you're potentially looking at parts of the market which are going to be much, much bigger than they have historically. You think about private wealth management as an example, which historically has only really been accessible by the top echelons of people with all the money, because it's a very people-oriented and heavy business that fundamentally takes a clip off someone's assets. And that's very hard for anyone to therefore, or for the average person to get access to good advice about how they should think about family planning, or, their their different parts of their tax returns they might need to think through. And so just the addressability of the market is immediately expanded when you can reduce the cost to serve because you're using software rather than, big teams of people. So it's really exciting from an investor's standpoint as well to think how big those markets can get.
So just to summarize, what you're saying is that when you're thinking about consumer and looking at consumer AI, you're very much looking at the consumer journey, and you're seeing that we've got fragmentation, opaque markets, complex services, supply constrained services. Those are the places where you're seeing AI really unlocking a lot of potential and a lot of new use cases or company creation that it's very interesting to look at. I think that's an interesting framework, especially for the journalists out there that are trying to figure out where should I maybe be keeping an eye a bit closer to consumer. These are 4 interesting areas. Then I'd love to ask you, what are the open questions and unknowns when it comes to understanding where consumer AI is moving and where to keep an open eye?
Yeah, as you can imagine, we think about this a lot as well and talk about it a lot. I think the first one for us is the kind of adoption, the path to adoption at scale and enduring adoption beyond some of the sort of more experimental use cases that we see people applying it for. And when we talk about this, we try and segment the world a little bit into assistants and AI agents. And crudely, the kind of assistant side of it is the AI software helping you as the user accomplish a task, which is effectively a supercharged, much richer search experience. And then on the agent side of the spectrum, that's transition towards AIs actually taking actions on behalf of users and acting with some degree of independence and autonomy. Those two ends of the spectrum, like there's quite a lot of distance between them and lots of overlap, but we find it helpful to kind of tease them apart when we're trying to think about what do you have to believe for the adoption to ramp up on each side. And I think on assistants, we've already seen pretty enormous adoption across whether it's ChatGPT or Perplexity. They're kind of, the horse is bolted, right? I can't remember the latest stats, but I think it's 300, 400 million active users for ChatGPT. It's pretty clear that those generic models are out there in the wild and being used. Mostly on the sort of more horizontal level, we haven't seen a huge amount yet of scaled consumer adoption of some of the more vertical specific tools, particularly in a kind of, as a standalone destination. What we are starting to see is, particularly in the retail side of what we do at True, a lot of people starting to incorporate next generation chatbots or assistants within existing e-commerce platforms. So I think Amazon has one called Rufus. I think Walmart has launched one called Sparky. We're seeing people that are doing it on a kind of B2B basis for smaller merchants. That very much feels like it's happening, but it's not yet driving a standalone destination for the consumer. It's more of an add-on into existing platforms, which we'll come on to. And as we said, that's kind of like very much, in some ways is more opinionated and better evolution of search, which is incredible. And, it's a fundamentally different experience. But I think one of the questions that we have is, because it's effectively a sustaining innovation for a lot of incumbents that own the distribution, does that create opportunities for massive standalone businesses? I think there's a question mark there. I think on the agent front, we're a little bit more healthily skeptical, but optimistic is how I describe it.